Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Daniel Andrade. I'm an attorney at law and a board member for Stand Up for Jamaica. I'd like to welcome everybody to this, what we're calling a Teach-In webinar, and it is entitled Trapped in the System, Stand Up for Jamaica Reports. So Nelson Mandela once said, "It is said that no one truly knows a nation until one has been inside its jails. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones." In the midst of the pandemic, we have had to confront a very ugly truth. The system has failed one of our most vulnerable groups. According to Indicom's report, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that was recently released, it is said that there are 146 mentally ill inmates who have been detained at the Governor General's or the court's pleasure and deemed unfit to plead, awaiting trial at some of our correctional facilities. 130 of those, have been deemed unfit to plead. And of the 146 persons that have been detained, there are at least 15 of those persons who have been incarcerated for over 30 years. An important thing to note, by saying they have been unfit to plead, they have not been convicted. These people are innocent until proven guilty. I would like to introduce our panelists for our teaching session. Carla Gulotto, Executive Director of Stand Up for Jamaica. Stand Up for Jamaica is an NGO which has for the last 10 years been undertaking work in Jamaica's correctional facilities to improve the livelihoods and to institute rehabilitative programs for the inmates. Isat Buchanan, Jamaican attorney at law and legal counsel for Stand Up for Jamaica, who has been taking on a representation for some mentally ill persons who have been detained without conviction and has recently been able to obtain the release of one such inmate. Dr. Jeffrey Walcott, or I'm not sure if it's Dr. Jeffrey Walcott or Dr. Clayton Sewell, but we'll be joined by a psychiatrist, a Jamaican psychiatrist, who will also give their views. I also want to recognize the host for the teaching session, Alexis Goff, psychologist and longtime human rights activist who has been dedicated significant efforts to this issue. Briefly, I just wanted to outline the session for today. So we're going to have an overview of Stand Up for Jamaica's work and Jamaica's prison system that will be provided by Carla. Then ISAT will give a legal overview explaining how Noel Chambers and George Williams, what happened in those situations concerning those inmates. Also explaining the legal situation and framework for how such persons have been detained. Then we'll have someone speaking, either Dr. Walcott or Dr. Sewell, on the situation regarding mental health. Carla and Isaac will then outline Stand Up for Jamaica's plan of action going forward, and then we'll have a 15-minute question and answer session. Some of you have emailed and sent in your comments ahead of time, and we have those, and I would invite those who have additional questions or comments to send them into the chat so that we can recognize them. All right, thank you. And now I will hand over to Carla.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks everybody for this opportunity to explain to a wider audience what is happening in this moment, but also what it has been happening for the last 50 years, I assume, which is the amount of years spent by George Williams behind bars without a trial. Just to introduce Stand Up. Stand Up is a charity group, human rights NGO, and one of the biggest projects is into the penal institutions. We are working there since 2007, and we work basically on rehabilitation. on 3 guidelines: education, therefore we have schools in all the institutions, and we have remedial classes up to CXE. By the way, we are soon ready to do the CXE for this year. And then this year, for the first time, we have a pilot experiment at the university level, thanks to the assistance of UCC. Then we have professional skill. That means we have an amount of laboratories where people can learn a job, to do a job in a proper way and get a diploma. And we work in partnership with HEART. And then we have several teams of psychologists, behavioral psychologists, etc. I am going to discuss 2-3 matters, trying to be as quick as I can. One, why do we focus in rehabilitation? As Danielle has said before, Nelson Mandela's sentence is teaching a lot. Prison is not a nice place to be. It is really a place where people can get lost, mentally lost. So rehabilitation is the instrument that we utilize to fulfill and fill up that time that they have to serve doing something useful for themselves. Otherwise, being locked, being incarcerated, being left alone, being left with the philosophy of throw away the key, it will allow whoever is into the institution just to become a worse person. We are working against that. And we try to provide instruments for people, for inmates to use the serving time as a time when they learn. And so once they leave the institution, they have in their hands an amount of instruments they can use to go back to families, communities, society, as a person which is not a danger, but is a productive person. Secondly, among the various activities and psychological help, it is not a hobby. People are going into the prison in a state of mind, which most of the times is a good health, mental status. But they develop along the serving time an amount of illness and diseases due to the environment where they live. I would not think that you can keep healthy under a mentally point of view when you have a cell that you share in 6 and the cell is for 3. So you have 2 lying down on the floor, 2 with the hammocks end up on top of the head, and 1 standing and holding the grill for 3 hours until there is a shift for him to sleep, while the other one will be standing for the next 3 hours. Nor it is healthy to have to carry into the cell where that you share with others the bucket for your feces, and you have to do it in front of everybody, and you have to keep those buckets with you from 3 p.m. to 10 a.m. when they open back the blocks. It's not only a matter of health, it's a matter of pride. It is just horrible. And so all those elements create a sort of permanent tension, permanent risk. And what we have been noticing in the years that we are working at the services, that there is a high number of people which show sign of depression. They try to commit suicide, they shout, they yell, they have attacks of madness. All of that, it is due to the fact that they are in an environment which is not acceptable under any human rights basic principle. In all of that, there is a component of them which are the mentally ill. In DCS, at correctional services, in all, there is an average of 340, 350 mentally ill. Basically, they are in 2 institutions. One is St. Catherine and the other one is Tower Street. I have been visiting the block, and it is something which left me a scar. With people lying down on the floor, maybe unsound, almost naked. They don't even look at you because they get injection to stay calm and all of that. All of that, and also the fact that the so-called general population has been showing an increase signal of mental challenges. We have been presenting and writing research which has been presented in November 2019. And the research, basically, I don't want to go through the findings, it doesn't make much sense now, but if somebody wants to look at it, it is on our website. But the philosophy of the research was basically, prison is not a place for them to be. Mentally ill, plus mentally, I want to make a little diversion. We talk about mentally ill as it is a disease. Mentally ill is many different pathologies. Like if I tell somebody you are sick, you can be sick where? You can have a cancer, you can have belly cramps, etc., etc. Mentally ill is many, many different kinds of pathologies, which need to be professionally assessed and cured. So those people in the prison, they're just there in a total infringement. I don't even want to talk about human rights, but common sense, because they should be somewhere else. And they're still there, and our research was throwing a stone on the fact that they're totally lost in the system and they are locked there without having any chance to be cured. The correctional service has one psychiatrist, which is serving 4,600 inmates. I'm not talking about mentally ill only. The question which I ask to everybody who is listening, do you believe that one single person can deal with the full population of our penal institutions? That means also that having no form of health assistance, the only health activity which is done there, it is to give them a monthly injection, which will keep them basically unsound, they say calm, for 2 weeks. Then after 2 weeks, they start to get some mental power, and then they get another injection. That is what's happening to them. So the research was going that way, and we have been asking to Ministry of Health to provide alternative options once people end up in court, which is not Bellevue, it is community centers, etc. Because if the idea is do not send them to prison, we have to have a plan B. What are we gonna do with them? We cannot just send them back home and tell the family, this is your burden and you deal with it. If we decide that, especially for the ones which do not show heavy illness, it's possible to be reintegrated in their families and communities, families need a strong support. Otherwise, they are going to be left alone, same as their people have been left alone in the prisons. The family need to be sure that there will be a probation officer, that there will be a health care, that there will be all a network which is supporting their beloved at home. So, and that was the main philosophy of the research. It was also requested to the Minister of Justice to intervene, and there was a request to the Minister of Security to provide the Department of Correctional Services with funds, because if the funds are diverted, all of them to the police, DCS is complaining they cannot do what they are supposed to be doing. There was a moment of attention, and then everything went back until to basically nothing, until the report from Indecom. And from that report, I want to take 2 items. One, Mr. Chambers died in prison for basically malnutrition. If somebody had the opportunity to watch his pictures, I think that I don't need to talk at all. It was obviously completely destroyed physically. He had bugs in the bed and everything. This was not happening in a week. This is something which has been witnessed for 50 years until Mr. Chambers basically decided that he didn't want to live anymore. And this is one element. Second element, people were apologizing. I heard some apologies from the Prime Minister, from the Ministry of Security, about it is an unfortunate situation. I do not believe too much in apologies. I believe in action. If Mr. Chambers was there since 50 years, he has been kept hostage in a system where all the components did not work properly. Not probably DCS, which should have sent some report and push. Not the courthouse, because nobody was worrying about the fact that they didn't have any trial. Not the DPP office, not the Chief of Justice office. And let me add, not even the attorneys. There are attorneys assigned those people. And I also indicate that one of the attorneys mostly of them are members of the Legal Aid Council. As an attorney, you have the duty to follow your client to your best capacity. The second element which I was shocked from, but not so much, is that there is not a Mr. Chambers. There are 146 Mr. Chambers or similar Mr. Chambers. And that show you that is not unfortunate. That show you that this is the way how the system has been working for 50 years. And then the last element is the next case of Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams has been taken up thanks to the support of Isaac Buchanan, and his commitment was, I will get him out within 7 days. We went to court the first time on a Wednesday, and Mr. Williams was released the following Wednesday. That means it can be done. That means it can be done in a week. And we heard some embarrassing comments from the DPP office stating that Stand Up and also Mr. Buchanan were not patient enough to understand that to release an inmate, you need fair investigations. 50 years or a week is enough? I would suggest that everybody do some true reflections on the fact that it is possible, if you really want it, to get people out from the prison. Actually, we decided to take action. We want to work on other cases, and we decided at the moment just to start, we can manage the first 10 cases. We want to have them out as quick as possible. Challenges it's basically impossible to receive their names. We have been asking all over, and we were told that the names can be revealed from Minister of Security and Office of the Public Defender. We have been required the names, we did not get them yet. The other challenge is that due to the fact they are mentally ill, it's not that an attorney can go there and ask him to sign. There must be a family member which is supporting the request for him to be sent to trial. So I don't know how this can be useful today, but I want to appeal to whoever is listening or to whoever can reach the media to reach the families, because if the family is able to contact us, we are able to start today. So that is basically the major point. I think I overtake my 10 minutes, so I'm not going to say anything more. The only thing I want to add is kindly remember that Stand Up is taking an action which has as main issue and aim to force and push all those which have been neglecting their professional tasks to do what they are supposed to be doing. We are not a company of attorneys. We are a human rights group. We are not going to advocate as far as we can, as far as we don't see them out from the prisons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carla. That was a very comprehensive overview of what's been happening in prisons and what Stand Up for Jamaica has been doing, especially of late. Now I would like to invite ISAT to please give us a legal overview, explain to us how what happened to Noel Chambers and George Williams was possible. What are the legalities involved in this, what we know as Governor General's pleasure and the court's pleasure? So please, ISAT, go ahead.
System, the prison system as it is operating now, today as I'm speaking, in Jamaica, ought not be in operation at all. That's a bold statement, but if we are to appreciate the value of what the Mandela rules are, Ms. Golota had made mention of the way the inmates are stacked together. 6 persons in a three-man cell. And there's something called incumbent space that is of utmost importance to anybody's psychological functionability, if I can describe what I'm trying to, the picture I'm trying to paint. So that's for the average person who is a normal human being, who finds himself in trouble, is put into this system and is faced with a psychological attack, a mental breakdown that is guaranteed at the end of his incarceration to give him mental issues. Add that to persons who are suffering with mental illnesses and place them into this institution where there is no regard for human rights and humanity. Basic human decency is lost with the way our prisons and our jails and our detention centers are treating citizens of this country. Now, Noel Chambers and George Williams, ironically, 2 Rastafarians in a colonial society, who have found themselves in the 70s before the law with facts which are not clear to us and will never be clear to us in terms of what was the genesis of the decision to say they were unfit to plead. Certainly where George Williams is concerned, the file was not forthcoming and it was requested respectfully. Now, the system as we would have it, all basic. There was miscommunication, neglect, which resulted in kidnap and abuse, right to the point of death for one person, and certainly half of a century for the next. That is Chambers, respectfully, who unfortunately died because the attention was not given. And then there is Mr. Williams, who, thank God for the Indicom report, thank God for Stand Up for Jamaica, who would have said, listen, something has to be done. Now, in looking at the Governor General's pleasure, I want to start there and let you know that there are persons who we don't have access to at this very moment, who are still under the Governor General's pleasure, notwithstanding that the Privy Council, our highest court in the land, has said that it is unconstitutional as it breaches our doctrine in our constitution of separations of powers. That is, it is only a court who can determine an indefinite sentence or detain you under their pleasure. Notice I said detain, because currently with the state of emergency, the very thing we're complaining about with George Williams and Noel Chambers, the current Minister of Security is doing it now, detaining persons under his pleasure in breach of the constitutional rights and are destroying them mentally. And because they are young now, we don't appreciate it. But what you must understand is that if it is that the current administration remains in power for the next 18 years, those persons I'm speaking of will be at the minister's pleasure for that long. Very significant. Now, the courts, if you are unable to plead, that is, enter a verdict of guilty or not guilty because you have some mental disease of the mind. And I can tell you this, mental disease of the mind includes, for the purposes of law, diabetes, any hypertension, anything that alters your mental function, even heat stroke, at the day when you go before the court and the court says, take him away for assessment. The away that the court is referring to is a mental institution so that you can get treatment. Because if I step into the court with diabetes and my sugar is unbalanced and she says, what is your plea? And I'm incoherent, they will say, take him away until he's fit. Which means I could go to see a doctor and I get my insulin or whatever it is to regulate my function, and I will have the ability to understand what's going on in the court and be able to say guilty or not guilty. And that is all that is required for plea. And I can tell you this, half the accused men and women, mostly men in Jamaica, after they have said guilty or not guilty, they never speak in court again. It is the practice of defense attorneys to tell their clients to remain silent. Half the cases, or majority of them, the defendants never say anything after saying not guilty. Unlike, and the other half speaks from the dock. Very few ever takes the stand and say, in my defense, this is what happened. So appreciate then that after the court says take them to the mental institution, which is what happened with Williams and which is what happened with Chambers, the administration at the time said, out of expediency and budget constraints, we are not keeping these people in Bellevue. Shut it down. The Mental Health Act, we will rewrite it and legislate. Send them into the prisons. And when that was done, we have the DCS. I don't even know if it was the DCS at the time. This is how long, how many generations and decades would have passed that the law would have changed so much to the point that we had several hurricanes and earthquakes and natural disasters which would have caused paperwork to disappear. The people who are working there now, some of them have never seen George Williams. Some of them have never met Noel Chambers, so they wouldn't know who they were then, and they still don't know who they are now. If you go into the prisons, you would understand that the prison cannot release you unless the court orders them to. So the DCS, their hands are tied legally. Once they get the writ, that's it. But they have a duty to report. And the question is, what if they don't report? Well, the legislation says the court has a duty to check on the people that they sent there. So within the law, there was enough checks and balances to ensure that this would not happen. But as you can see, we spend more time seeing prison as punishment, so that even the person that decides that they are going to go to the Governor General's mansion and estate and steal some ackee is found to be unfit, and he finds himself 60 years later, 30 years, 40 years. We really don't know. We don't have access to all 146. So we can't say who are the persons that are being detained at the Governor General's pleasure or even the court's pleasure in excess, and this is the most important point, of the possibility of their guilt. so that if they were to plead tomorrow, some of them, they would have to be immediately released. They have maxed the time. So George Williams, even if he were found guilty and there was a trial last week, the sentencing guidelines do not permit a judge to give him that much time. And that time is reserved for the most egregious convictions. I will go as far as say, and this is not this, as far as saying there are persons, he did mention Earl Pratt, Mary Lynch. I can go far to say Adidja Palmer and others. These are persons who the state have said have committed the most egregious type of murder. And they have the time, the maximum amount of time or the minimum that they're to serve is less than what George has served. And now, where we are today, and we say actions speak louder than words. I was very passionate about this. I was happy with the help of the board, to which I got good guidance from, and we had good conversations about the best way forward. But what is key is that the law is what governs what ought to happen. There should be serious concerns about the very persons who have neglected this fragile class to be put in charge of deciding how they are released, because most of them are at a position where they're not supposed to be in prison, not in law, and there's no jurisdiction for fairness in relation to what to do with them, because they have exceeded the maximum amount of time that the law allows, and they are free in any event, worst case scenario. And we have to consider that, so that moving forward, which Ms. Galata would have said, it is really not the duty of Stand Up Jamaica to take every 146 case and release 146 persons and say, look what we did, pat on the back. No, our purpose is to bring awareness, is to encourage the public to get involved, to ensure that the persons, the state actors who are responsible, do their work, ensure that they allocate the necessary funds to prevent this disaster from ever happening again. The apologies are most unfortunate because it has become meaningless. Because after George has come out 7 days now, we're speaking of on the 8th day, and there has not been one release of even one of the 46 to assure us that we have identified the man, and he's there, Peridial larceny, the man that stole Aki, the man that broke a glass, that the maximum time is 18 months. And it's still, we have to find that person. But to say this, that we must be vigilant in finding and enforcing and encouraging the immediacy and the urgency that these persons need to be released. Even if it's not to their families, the government should revert funds or allocate funds to building a facility, improving a facility, because I was most offended. The security minister has announced that he has built cells to house men who are possibly still a national threat after having a conviction. And they're going to put them into what is now the first Pegasus of the prison institution, and put them in a new place with technology to jam cell phone and communications, the communication technology to prevent them from communicating with the outside world, so we can punish them while we have mentally ill persons who need that facility with medical staff to monitor them. And as a matter of humanity and common sense, that wasn't a priority for them. And so we can't just listen to something is going to happen. And actions speak louder than words. So if there's nothing further for me before I become overly emotional, I think those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Isaac. No, you have a right to be passionate about this. We all have a right to be passionate about this because it's a very serious matter. So I will now invite Dr. Walcott, psychiatrist, who will now give an overview of this issue of mentally ill persons, the whole issue of mental health within our prisons and some of the work he has done. Thank you, Dr. Walcott. I will just say that we have about 20 minutes left in this teaching session. So
I
we
will
want
take
time for questions. Right, okay, thank you.
because I think Mr. Buchanan covered most of the issues and the aspects. There is no scope within the legal framework for a defendant to have to prove innocence for future crimes. And I think that is the basic principle under which these atrocities have been committed. There's a misconception with regards to the risk of violence of persons with mental illness. There has been a dearth of literature from the 60s coming forward that have established that persons, especially with schizophrenia, are of no greater risk to the general public than any other persons within the population. And I would go far as to say in our current culture that the mentally ill are even far less dangerous because we see the level of murders that we have in our country. And the very few cases where persons who commit these murders are mentally ill are certainly well below their population representation. So that's the premise, first of all. Second, with regards to treatment, because there has been a proposal which has been discussed, firstly by my association, the Jamaica Psychiatric Association, which I've been very strongly opinionated about. And having shared the discussion with the forensic psychiatrist who initially was of that view, that there's a need for a forensic system or a forensic facility, it is merely a practice of shifting one prison for the next. And I think that is the clear issue. We have in this country over the past 50 years established and developed a system of managing persons in the least restrictive environment in the community mental health services. But as with all things in our country, once it starts to work, it is then gutted. And what we are suffering from is not a lack of facility or institution, but the under-resourcing of the appropriate modes and methodologies for treating these persons. Mr. Williams is using his case study. As he left, I made contact with the mental health nurse with regards to that team, and I forwarded all the clinical information. And they have assured that they will either A, be visiting the house to ensure that he is medicated consistently and liaise with the family, which they have the contact number for the family. This is what happens all over the country. 18,000 schizophrenics are managed in the community mental health service every year. The Auditor General's report in 2016 spoke to that, and they are managed well. But over time, what we've seen is a stripping away of that service by under-resourcing it, cutting allotments to the staff in terms of sessional allotments, traveling allowances, because a lot of the work that they do has to be done within the community. The persons have to be treated where they live. We have to provide the resources to deliver the treatment where they live. And incidentally, as we speak about these institutions, the budgetary allotment needed for the community service is far less than it needs to run an institution or even build one. Currently, we have $2 billion allotted to mental health in the country. 1.2 billion is allocated to the mental hospital, which sees less than 19% of the needs to the patients. And so that's part of the problem. It's the proper resourcing. Not only will the community mental health services follow up these persons, but they can prevent people from ending up in this prison system. I have a case I can speak briefly about without giving it much detail because it's under cover of confidentiality. A gentleman that assaulted his mother very badly a few days ago. And that gentleman would have ended up like any of these other persons with this mental illness. With the difference is that at this current state, the police and the mental health service have a working relationship, and he was diverted, not to prison. He's not been charged, but he was diverted directly into treatment, which he will be getting treatment, and that treatment will be consistent. And the family has been engaged, and we have had the discussion with the family to outline the fact that the lack of consistency of treatment is what has caused this issue to come up and will cause the issue to come up. The number of persons that will remain mentally ill is very, very minute. And we have great developments over the past years in medication and pharmaceutical agents that can deal with these issues. So the premise that the reason why these people are languishing in prison is because there is no service that is there for them to be put into that will secure the need for proof of safety is not true. The services are there, but the services have to be properly resourced, and they have to be supported, which they are not, or not even resourced. They have to stop scavenging them. They have to stop trying to undermine them and let the services do what they're supposed to do. And that's the main issue. As Mr. Buchanan highlighted, there is nowhere in the civilized world where someone has to prove innocence. Not even for the crime they are alleged to have committed, but rather for future crimes, which is what is being asked of the mentally ill. They are being asked to prove their innocence for future crimes that will develop, to prove that they will not go out and kill somebody. There's no facet on the law or treatment or health services that speaks to that. And in our aspect, the issue of prevention is a health issue. These persons need to be treated by the services that exist within their communities. As we talk about mental health facilities, the average time span for a person spending in Bellevue is about 31 days. That's a month. No matter how severely ill they are, within a month they're back home. Most of the persons who are still languishing, which have come down from 1,000 to now under 500, have been there because of the same problem that existed in the penal system. The violation of the person's right to freedom and right to movement within the country. They have been kept. And if you look at the system, how the structures are, it's no different from a prison. They have been kept there against their will. The structures that were put in place to prevent that, which was the review board, to have their cases reviewed, because nobody being kept at Bellevue has done so with their permission. They are literally being kidnapped. And the same thing happens with the prison system. There is no premise under which these persons are being held under either law or health structures or health management. There's none. There's no health requirement for a person to be indefinitely held in an institution. This is a clear violation of their rights. Service delivery is very specific, and it's very comprehensively geared towards providing care, not preventing them from committing crimes. And if you provide care and their mental state is stable, then you don't have to worry about all these issues of violence. But locking someone up does not, has no therapeutic value. It's merely an issue of security for the society. So you're in essence violating the rights of these persons, either by the prisons or the mental hospital, to please the society at large that are working off of incorrect presumption that these persons are more violent. And there has been no evidence to support this, none. In most instances, which is very clear, persons with mental illness are more likely to be victims of exploitation and of violence. And what we're seeing here is clear evidence of exploitation and structural violence by the systems that are supposed to be put in place to protect them. The purpose of the not fit to plead cover is to prevent the courts from exploiting the person from unnecessary or nefarious convictions. That was its purpose. Its purpose was to prevent someone who is mentally ill from being taken advantage of by a court system that would use nefarious means to convict them of a crime. What it has ended up being is it has ended up as being an excuse for an illegal prison sentence that the persons are not supposed to be having. That is the premise. That's my 10 minutes.
All right, thank you, Dr. Walcott, for that. I think you gave a very good overview of how this issue is placed within the general mental health system and how it has been set up to deal with treating mentally ill persons. So I think that gave us a very good contextual picture for what avenues are out there and options. So I want to now open the floor for questions and answers, but before I do, and please I invite you to put them in the chat if you can. We do have some questions that had been sent in beforehand. For those who registered for the webinar, they were invited to send questions with their registrations, and we received a few of them. So I'm going to deal with those firstly. I have here a question that actually came up about 3 times, ISAT, for you. and I think this is something a lot of people are wondering. What is the process for compensation for the aggrieved or their families? So, and it's really asking about, for those persons, what happens to them in terms of receiving compensation from the government? Are there any options other than litigation? And what about the attorney fees for those who are brought to court? Who is liable for paying those? So I want you to just with those questions.
All right, so naturally, there is an avenue for compensation. There is pre-litigation. That is, you write to the Attorney General, invite them to settle, you give a figure of what the claim is, and naturally you then do your false imprisonment claim, as well as seek for there is exemplar damages, aggravated damages, and all the necessary Section 19 constitutional breaches. In terms of the payment for the attorney, it comes back in what is called cost. So the attorneys can ask the court to pay for the cost. So they document what the cost is. And so those are the avenues. So compensation is there, and it must be done. It's not something that the government can escape. It's not a matter of if there is compensation, it's how much the family agrees to, and how reasonable the government of Jamaica is, and understanding that it ought not take another 50 years for the victims and their families to be compensated with statements like, to be fair, and to give us time to make assessments and carry people who have real lives, real human beings with real lives, to wait on paper pushers to make decisions.
Thank you for that, Isat. Dr. Walker, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Will each person that has been imprisoned without trial for an extended period that they label as mentally ill need to have a psychiatric report done in order to go before the courts?
No, that's an intriguing issue. The court requires indication as to their fitness, but regarding the psychiatric report, it's based on the need of the courts, because it's whether to determine their safety or risk, impact of their psychiatric illnesses. But in essence, it really doesn't speak to anything of value with regards to what we're dealing with now, because what their mental state is really has nothing to do with their disposition. And I think that's the misconception that most people are having. These people, whether they're mentally ill or not mentally ill, are being held against their will for the premise that they are going to commit a future crime. That's not relevant. But the courts can request it. So there was a difficulty because, and a misunderstanding, because there was an appeal to the JPA to provide psychiatrists to do evaluations for fitness to plead, but it was not indicated that they would need to generate a full report. So there is some miscommunication with regards to that. But in essence, what is needed is the determination of fitness to plead. A psychiatric evaluation gives a premise of the person's risk, the nature of the illness, but that doesn't really assist the court much, because it doesn't come into the state that they were in when they committed the crimes, and that would be a completely different report if they were going to trial. But it really doesn't matter. Their risk level is really for the services that are going to follow them up, not the courts. Mr. Isat wants to say.
Clarity. The legislation actually requires 2 psychological evaluations to assist the judge, and the standard form, which Dr. Walker can tell you he also filled out, is what the legislation actually identifies as the report. So one has to understand that it's not a full-on report like what took place in the George Williams case. It's just a form which says the person can say guilty or not guilty on the appointed date. It's not rocket science.
Okay, thank you for that. So I have a question here, which I think many people it's on the minds of many people. How will relevant persons in the prison system be held accountable for the death of some and the ill treatment of other prisoners over decades? And that I think is a very weighty question. And I would invite Carla and Isat if you have any comments on that, but please keep it brief because there are a few more questions we have that we want to go through. Thank you. And if anyone who is participating has a question that they want to raise, I'd invite you to raise your hands in the chat. There's a raise hand icon so that we can recognize you. Carlo or Isat, who would like to go first? Carlo? All right.
Okay. I'm gonna be very quick. We don't have any control on them apart from the fact that we can try to prosecute their guilty action. You never know, it can be that one day they will end up in prison instead of sending people to prison. I think they have the duty to perform their professional task, and if they don't, this is our major advocacy action. Pretend.
For me, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, so for me, respectfully, and this is where I probably depart, I don't think there is a human being in existence. This is the system. In America, they would call it the man. In Jamaica, it's the crowd. So it is the system. It is government. I should correct that. In Jamaica, they call it Babylon. So it's not a person. So I don't think that, and I'm defending the DCS right here. Those men and women who put on their little uniform and they have their little 3, 4, 5 CXCs that goes into the prison and is interfacing day to day with these inmates, and some of them treat them with respect and dignity as best as they can. It wouldn't be fair to them. I can't say that a clerk who certainly is given the duty to be checks and balances when there's no computerized system and things in place. No human being is responsible. It is the government at the day. If after the next election, it is the PNP in power, they're responsible. But no, I wouldn't wish prison on anybody.
Okay, thank you. So quickly, I have a question here that's interesting. Can the DPP simply gather the names of those being held for an extensive period and classified as mentally ill, take those files to court and advise the judge whether or not there's still a viable case against them to have them released? Or does each person have to appear in court for consideration for release from custody?
So two things. Which is a good, so the question has put forth a great solution. The DPP submits to the court that all these persons we have no interest in. The court then can, on its own volition, call up these persons and tell them you're free to go. It is really that simple. And so two things. The DPP does the same thing, enter nolle prosecute, meaning the state has no interest. So then they ought not be there. But also, the court itself can say, where are they? If they have the list, they can say for themselves, where are the 146 files? If the DPP, you have 1 week to find them and say what you are going to do. And if when in 7 days, the very court can say all these matters are dismissed for want of prosecutions. So all those writs and all those detention orders will be revoked and the DCS will just have to release.
Okay, thank you for that, Isat. And then we have a question from the chat by Hillary Nicholson. She wants to know, is a lack of psychiatrists in prisons, in the prison system, did you say one? Exclamation mark. Simply a matter of financial resources or professional psychiatrists who are not willing? Dr. Walcott, I'd love to hear your view on this.
we had a discussion, and I think it's a combination of both. One of the issues that we have to look at is that persons who work within the various professional bodies do so to be compensated, because there are laws from 1834 that prevent, labor against one's will and without proper compensation. And I think the issue that was being discussed was that there are no posts available for job security. As it stands now, there are sessional rates that are offered that are of very little interest to most persons within the professional field. There have been a few who have volunteered. But even the psychiatrists that work within the prisons, because I think it was a public defender that wrote an article that identified, and I'm very aware of the psychiatrists that are working within those systems, and they're very efficient and very effective. Dr. who we were at the trial together, is someone that is very meticulous. And the public defender identified that most of these people have up-to-date psychiatric evaluations. As Isa was mentioning, it's just a form that is filled out. And most of them have evaluations that have been done continuously. Most of them are being treated within the prison services. So the issue is not a lack of the psychiatrists. The issue is one, as we've identified, of a systematic problem that is created that has to be addressed. The psychiatrists can evaluate them from here till thy kingdom come, but we do not have the power to have these persons removed from the prisons. We don't. And so it's more a distraction than a focus on what the real issues are. These people are not languishing for 50 years because of lack of psychiatric treatment. They're languishing because that they have not been viewed. They have not been brought to the fore. No one has actually had them being brought up for a decision-making process. They have been delayed, and what's happening is a kick the can down the road syndrome, where every time they turn up to court, the can is kicked further, and there's no end in sight as to where they should go. So I think that is something that has to be addressed. It's not an issue of the lack of psychiatrists or resources. And instead, most community mental health services now have designated forensic clinics where they see persons who are being charged in the community for offenses and are brought before the judge, and are usually disposed one way or the other, either to treatment in a mental facility, mental community services, or are charged and face their sentence. So I think we have to not deflect from what the real issues are.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Walcott. So we're actually out of time, and I know that there are probably some burning issues that have left to be uncovered by this, but we have to sum up and we have to wrap up. So I think it was a very informative discussion. I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank all of the participants. I want to give a big thank you to Alexis Goff, who has hosted this session. I think it was excellent for shedding light on how this terrible, inhumane injustice has been happening for decades to people. And we have a saying, out of mind, out of sight. So I'm happy that we're shedding light on it, and it's no longer out of our minds, out of our sights. I just wanted to mention also that the incredible work that Stand Up for Jamaica is doing and ISAT is doing to right these injustices. It as I said before, Stand Up for Jamaica is an NGO. Resources are limited. Alexis Gov has kindly set up a GoFundMe campaign for paying for the fees. It includes the legal fees, psychiatrists, travel, and even funds to help the mentally ill upon release. So Alexis has shared that in the chat, the link to the GoFundMe, and it will also be sent out to all registered participants. Also, Carla, I don't know if you want to say briefly 1 or 2 words about Stand Up for Jamaica's long-term advocacy goal as it relates to prisons. You have like 1 minute. If there's something that you want to share.
Thank you, Danielle. I think that basically I spoke about stand-up mission. There is, if I have 1 minute, there is one thing that I want to say. Remember where you were asking what we can do. It's a matter of accountability. I don't want to put more wood on the fire, but I would love to remind everybody that we are dealing with mentally ill in this moment. But one of the most dramatic situations in the prison is people which are staying into the prison, serving a term which is longer than their sentence. It is very common. There are people which have been sentenced to 18 months. Yesterday, just to give an example, 2 people came to our office stating that their family, it was their family, appealed, and they're waiting for the appeal since 5 years, while the sentence was 18 months. It is something which is involving hundreds of poor inmates, and is something that again is a call for the system to review the justice functioning in Jamaica, because it does not work for too many people.
Okay, thank you for that, Carlo, and thank you everyone, and please stay safe in these times.
And thanks to you, Danielle.
Yes.
All right, take care.